a very small but a very powerful poem by uh, W.H. Auden. W.H. Auden. Auden is Anglo-American poet. Anglo-American poet like T.S. Eliot. And a brief about his life, we can say his full name is Wystan Hugh Auden. It's W.H. Auden. He was born in 1907 and he passed away in 1973. We don't want to go into much deeper biographical references of the poet. We want to see, or we want to read the poem like the new critics are supposed to read. Try to read the language of poetry and try to see what we can understand, what we cannot understand, how far the text of the poem has all the meanings within itself. It is an entity in itself. So all the meaning should come from within the text, and to what extent we require the help of outside sources, that is external sources. How far the poem is intrinsic and extrinsic. So if we don't know some of the historical references, then will that become a problem in understanding a poem or not? Will the language of the poetry be self-sufficient to let us know what the poetry wants to say? Again, we make a point very clear. When we do new critical reading, we are not asking the question what the poet wants to say, but we try to ask the question what the poetry wants to say. What is the poetry trying to say to us? What is the meaning of the language of poetry? We keep in mind T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, Cleanth Brooks, Rolla Barthes, who said about death of the author, reader response theory, and all those things remain in the back of our mind when we try to read the poem. In our previous session, we have seen that when we are reading W.B. Yeats's poem on being asked for a war poem or the second coming, we realize that, well, we need some references that this poem was written during First World War to better understand the context, or the second coming has a reference coming from a biblical second coming, which gives us a better way of understanding that what he's making. So even though poetry is self-sufficient, it has all the meanings within itself. But if we know some of the external things about the author or the time which is mirrored in this work of art, or a kind of an X-ray image of the time that this poetry is trying to take, if we are aware about that time, then we can perhaps have a still deeper and better understanding of the poetry. So that is what we are trying to see, that how it plays a vital role. Okay? So today's poem that we want to see is Epitaph on a Tyrant. Epitaph on a Tyrant, written by W.H. Auden. Okay. So this is the poem. So coming back to the poem Epitaph on a Tyrant, written by W.H. Auden. We want to see this poem here. Okay, so Epitaph on a Tyrant, yes, written by W.H. Auden. And the poem seems to be written at the end of 1930s. Yeah, at the end of 1930s. So around 1939 seems to be an immediate cause of the time. It is said that W.H. Auden passed some of the years in Berlin, around 1930s, and Berlin is in Germany, in Germany. And then later on, when he wrote this poem, people obviously are seeing that this tyrant, the tyrant that we see here, who must be this tyrant? If we try to question this, then the immediate answer obviously is Hitler. Yes, Hitler. That is the immediate answer as the time in which the poem is written. So, Epitaph on a tyrant. So this is a very small but a very powerful poem, which tries to be a kind of a nature or characteristics of not only Hitler but all tyrants. So it tries to give us characteristics, nature of tyrants, which can be very commonly found among all kinds of tyrants there. Okay? A very small poem, but a very powerful poem. Okay? Again, just 6 lines only in this poem, and it begins with the word perfection. Perfection of a kind was that he was after. Perfection of a kind was that he was after, and the poetry he invented, was easy to understand. He knew human folly like the back of his hand. He knew human folly like the back of his hand, and was greatly interested in armies and fleets, and was greatly interested in armies and fleets. When he laughed, respectable senators burst with laughter. And when he cried, the little children died in the street. And when he cried, the little children died in the streets. Well, let us try to open this poem and try to see what is so interesting about this particular poem here. Well, the very first word, perfection. Now, perfections seem to be a very positive word. It is a good word. If somebody is striving to be perfect, or if somebody is trying to achieve perfection in any of the works, then obviously it is to be celebrated. It is something good. So again, it seems like the poetry, or we may have a question, is this poetry trying to celebrate the tyrants? Is Auden there to celebrate the tyrant? There are many tyrants in 20th century. Are they all being celebrated by a poet? Is this poet trying to be politically right? Is trying to use poetry for the right side of the politics, being on the side of the tyrants? And is he making the poem? That all questions will emerge in our mind initially, that what is he doing? Now, if that is all these questions that we are getting, if the answer is yes, that yes, he is doing this, then we may have a huge question that what is the role of poetry? What is the role of poetry? What is the role of poet in a society? So are they there to sing the prashasti songs of tyrants or any kind of rulers there, or to question that? So the second word, the phrase, rather, we can say, of a kind. The of a kind, it destroys the very word that is perfection. The perfection that is constructed here is deconstructed by the word of a kind. So it is not a normal perfection, but of a particular kind, was that he was after. So whatever kind of perfection that he was after, and if we see here in the context of Hitler, then obviously we find that what kind of perfection he was after. And the extrinsic elements of the poetry, the outside of the poetry, the history that was there, which tells us that, well, Hitler's perfection was a very harmful perfection so far as humanity is concerned. It was rather, we can say, a crime so far as humanity is concerned. It may not be a crime for a nation. It may not be a crime for a nation, but so far as humanity is concerned, which is beyond a nation, which is beyond national identities, at that time, his perfection was a huge crime. It was a terrible crime against humanity. So a perfection of a kind was that was what he was after. So right in the very first sentence, we realize that this element of perfection is a terrible perfection. People may say many times that, well, so and so person is working so hard, so and so person is working so many hours a day, all his works are perfect, everything. But the question that comes here is that, the question that we tend to ask here obviously is that at the end of the day, what that work is for. Is that work for, if you want to use all good words, religion, politics, culture, society, or for humanity? I deliberately put the binaries of humanity is on one side and all other things on the other side. That is nation, religion, culture, society. Because many times when people say that nation first, we should be proud of our religion, we should be proud of our culture. At that time, we are worried that is this language, the person who is trying to perfect the pride in nation, pride in religion, will he use all this thing against humanity? If he is going to use it against humanity, then what will be the thing? So Hitler's story, as you have seen, the great dictator also, Jews are the outsider, they are the second citizens, they should live in ghettos, they should not be considered as equal, people should not be considered equal. Sometimes we find that some animals are more equal than people. Sometimes suddenly we find that some animals are more equal than the human beings also. And so we feel like in some societies, some animals, not all animals, some animals are respected more than even human beings. Now, what is the harm? You are perfecting that, but it is a particular kind of perfection, which is very harmful to humanity. Harmful to humanity. Yeah. Getting my voice?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I think I lost a voice in this device. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And second line, and the poetry he invented was easy to understand. Now this line has again very deeper repercussions. First, the word poetry, if we see, what do we mean by poetry? Well, we can say that by poetry, poetry can be seen as a narration. The narration that is invented by the tyrant, the way he is telling us that this is, or it can be his own way of telling history, his own way of telling history, tyrant's way of telling history. It can be his narration or his way of telling history, or his making stories, poetry. So the poetry can be seen in this term, that his poetry. What are the songs that he is singing? What are the songs that the tyrant is singing? The songs of tyrants, the narration of tyrants, the history that he is telling to us, not the real history, the stories that he is making, all that can be seen as poetry. Poetry. Then the word invented. Yes, the word invented. Now, normally what we see is that with poetry, what we see is created. The word that goes well is created or written. Yes, written, or you can say told. That is recited. Yeah, recited. These are some normal words that goes with poetry. Invented is something very curious. Invented is a very curious word to see that what do we mean by invented poetry. Invention is something new that somebody has, it was not there. If there was nothing like poetry, and then somebody comes with something, it can be known as his invention. But poetry is there for centuries. Poetry is there for centuries. Nobody invents poetry. You create poetry, you write poetry, you recite poetry. But invention, it means that these people, tyrants, they always keep on telling that I am the first to do it. I am the first to do it, in inverted commas. Every time they will say that first of its kind. This is the first thing that he has done. Nobody before that. Now all tyrants has this common, to be the first, you have to be inventor of something. Inventor of something. And these tyrants are great inventors of lies also, falsehoods. And they tell with such a kind of a conviction as if they are speaking truth. As if they are speaking truth. That is their way of telling their poetries or inventing their poetries there. Then this word again is very interesting. Was easy to understand. Easy to understand. Now this is again very confusing. Easy to understand the word. Now we know that in 20th century setting of this literature, we have seen that 20th century literature is not easy to understand. It is not easy to. It is esoteric, avant-garde, and very difficult for laymen. The reasons we have seen earlier why it is so. And again, when it comes, it is easy to understand. It again takes us into a kind of a discussion that the habits of tyrants is always to oversimplify things. Oversimplification is the characteristics of tyrant's way of dealing with the things. If there is some kind of intellectuality is required to understand something, the tyrant will oversimplify it to such an extent to tell that intellectuality is not required. And sometimes they will go to such an extent to tell that you don't require to apply your brains anywhere. Everything is easy to understand. Everything is oversimplified. And that's why many times they start developing a kind of an aversion or contempt towards intellectuality. Also, tyrants, they start developing a kind of aversion or contempt towards intellectuality itself also. Many times, very famously, people use this word that Harvard versus hard work. Harvard versus hard work. Harvard stands for intellectuality. It is the topmost university, and where everything is done with the help of intellectuality. Whereas hard work against Harvard, it means you don't require intellectuality. You don't require intellectual. That is how the narrations are many times made there. So this idea. Now, this also leads to an interesting debate about this idea that whether the literature should be very simple, poetry should be very simple, or difficult poetry. Many people have said that poetry should be simple and to be understood by everybody. That is where the democratic spirit of literature lies. If you make it for only a few, then it is not democratic, because the democracy is about the people, about all people. So the very idea about democratic spirit that dies when literature is esoteric, when literature is esoteric. So this question becomes a question of debate, and I would like to cite here one reference from. Let me just share a screen also with all of you. The reference that we want to cite here is from Geoffrey Hill. Geoffrey Hill, and Geoffrey Hill's this write-up here is on the art of poetry. Yeah? And this, the art of poetry. Yeah? Geoffrey Hill, the art of poetry. And in this write-up, what he says here, let me share the screen. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Geoffrey Hill, the art of poetry. Yeah? In this, there is a very interesting reference here, and let me share only a part of that, which is interesting to us for understanding this poetry here. Okay, let me read it briefly from this part here. This Geoffrey Hill in the art of poetry discusses about this easiness of poetry, and in that context, he says, "I think art has a right, not an obligation, to be difficult if it wishes. And since people generally go on from this to talk about elitism versus democracy, when we discuss this, the point that comes is elitism versus democracy. Elitism means for a few people, esoteric, learned, scholarly, intellectuals, yeah? Versus democracy. When we see this debate, elitism versus democracy, I would add that genuinely difficult art is truly democratic, and that tyranny requires simplifications. What he says very clearly, which is very much directly connected with our poet Geoffrey Hill in the art of poetry. Genuinely difficult art is truly democratic, and that tyranny requires simplifications. This thought does not originate with me. It's been far better expressed by others. I think immediately of the German classicists and Kierkegaardian scholar Theodor Hecker, who went into what was called inner exile in double inverted comma in the Nazi period, Hitler's party, Nazi period, and kept a very fine notebook throughout that period, which miraculously survived, though his house was destroyed by Allied bombing. Hecker argues, Geoffrey Hill writes here, Theodor Hecker, who is a Kierkegaardian scholar, but who was in inner exile because he was a part of Nazi. So inner exile. And he kept a small diary which survived even after the bombing. Hacker argues, with specific reference to the Nazis, that one of the things the tyrant most cunningly engineers, one of the things the tyrant most cunningly engineers is the gross oversimplification of language. Is the gross oversimplification of language, because propaganda requires that the mind of the collective respond primitively to slogans of incitement. So many times they go into sloganeering also. Lots of sloganeering comes in propagandist language or political language or in tyrants language also, which people can easily remember. Primitive mind, which is there not to think but to grasp what is easily understood. So many times a very learned scholar, politician, when they speak, it goes very dull and you have to apply lots of mind to understand them. Whereas there are other kind of politicians, they speak in such a mesmerizing way that without any pain, we understand everything. At that time, we rarely think that it is the characteristics of tyrants to use oversimplified language, to appeal to the primitiveness of the mind, which can easily grasp the language. If you have ever heard any of the speeches or any of the writings, if you have read any of the writings of Dr. Manmohan Singh, you will find that you will have to scratch your head so many times. You can't even, because he will use a very high kind of language. He's a scholar. He's a professor of economics. His books are published by Oxford University and in volumes, not simple thin book. If you'll see, volumes of books are published by Oxford, and they are studied by this world-class universities. Now, to listen to him or to read what he says is very tough, very tough. So politicians are politicians, but they have good and the bad aspect. Everything is there. But tyrant is of a different kind. Tyrant is of a different kind, who uses the language with oversimplifications there. And any complexity of language, any ambiguity, any ambivalence implies intelligence. Whenever you think of paradox of language, which Cleant Brook says, intelligence is required. If you want to put a night with the day, you have to think also. So any kind of paradox that you want to bring, it requires or it implies intelligence. It implies many of the poems that we have seen, that we are not able to open those poems. Why? It implied intelligence. It required some kind of historical sense. And without that, it was not easy to open all those poems. So complexity of language, any ambiguity, any ambivalence implies intelligence. Maybe an intelligence under threat, maybe an intelligence under threat, maybe an intelligence that is afraid of consequences, intelligence which is under threat. That's why that escapism comes, E.M. Foster's escapism that we have seen yesterday, the idea about escapism that we have seen. There are two chief reasons for escapism. We may retire to our towers because we are afraid, but there is another motive to retreat, that is boredom and disgust and other thing also. So intelligence under threat may be an intelligence that is afraid of consequences, but nonetheless an intelligence working in qualifications and revelations, resisting therefore tyrannical simplification. So that is what this point becomes very interesting to keep in mind, that poetry he invented was easy to understand, I hope this point gets very clear in this larger context of modernist literature, tyranny, and the use of language in terms of simplification or making it implied language, which is appealing to our intellect. He knew human folly. He knew human folly like the back of his hand. Now, before we go into human folly, what is this back of his hand? What is this back of his hand? The back of his hand is literally back of his hand. Literally is this part. Literally, if you see me, then I am just pointing here. The back of the hand. The back of the hand. Now, this back of the hand is idiom. It is an idiom. It is literally, it is this back. But when I say what is this back of the hand? Back of the hand idiomatically means koine unda hath nahi apvi. Unda hath nahi japat. As a back of the hand is this, to beat somebody. This is back of the hand, idiomatically. So this reference, and this is also considered as left hand also. When you look at daba hath nahi, આપણે કહીએ કે આને ડાબા હાથની બુડથલ દેવાની જરૂર છે અથવા ઊંધા હાથની ડાબો હાથ એ ઊંધો હાથ છે ડાબો હાથ એ ઊંધો હાથ પણ છે. I remember one small poem by Meena Kandasamy here, a small poem again of just six to seven lines by Meena Kandasamy. We have referred to several of her poems earlier also. This is Eklavyan. Eklavyan. This poem is Eklavyan. Eklavya, the mythical figure. And the poem goes in this way, where this reference is connected, intertextuality of the literature that we can see there. The poetry goes like this. Title is Eklavyan. You can do a lot of things. You can do a lot of things with your left hand. With your left hand. Now, who is you? Title is making it clear. You is Eklavya. And why you are telling Eklavya that you can do lot many things with the left hand? Because his right hand thumb was taken in Guru Dakshina. His right hand thumb was taken by Guru Dronacharya in Guru Dakshina. Now his right hand was useless. And in archery, you know that thumb is very important. You have to pull the string of the bow, and if you don't have a thumb, it is very tough to operate. So you are almost without your skill. But the poetry, this poem, see this. You can do lot of things with your left hand. Besides fascist Dronacharya, see fascist Dronacharya, which goes with Dronacharya as a tyrant. Fascist Dronacharya warrant left-handed treatment. પહેલું તો કે ડાબા હાથની દ્રોણાચાર્યને આપવાની જરૂર છે. It is fascist Dronacharya warrants left-handed treatment. This is that back of the hand. Back of the hand there. Also, last two lines of this poem. Also, you don't need your right thumb. You don't need your right thumb to pull a trigger or hurl a bomb. To pull a trigger or to hurl a bomb, you don't require right thumb now. Well, so maybe it is encouraging the people to use bombs and guns to kill the fascist tyrants instead of bow and arrow. But again, the reference is this left-handed treatment or back of his hand. So now here in this context, using back of his hand means using the ways of violence, using the ways of violence against the people. That is back of his. He knows it very well. He knows it very well. Sam, dam, dand, ved, everything he knows it very well. So when to use dand, this backhand of the treatment, that is very much aware about. And then here it is human folly. He knew human folly. And what are these human follies? If you see, then human follies are like humans are, we can say, emotionally susceptible, emotionally susceptible people. Yes, our human folly is that we are emotionally susceptible, and that tyrant is well aware about. And the emotional susceptibility of the human folly emotional susceptibility of this, how it becomes human folly. Because when it comes to the ideas like, for example, mother, nation, when it comes to religion, when it comes to the idea about selfhood, at that time normally humans are more emotional. They are more emotional in dealing with all these things. And so the tyrant, who is well aware about the emotional susceptibility, and he can exploit this as a human folly, and in his language he keeps on using this all symbols to fool human beings, One of the major concern, obviously, that becomes very interesting is the idea of nation, nation. And in that concept, great many people can be easily fooled when we say that let us put our nation first. Yes. What the poet wants to say, that let us keep people first. Let us keep people first. Automatically, nation, religion, culture, society will come in forefront. Automatically, everything will come in forefront if we will keep people first. But then the tyrant's language will not go towards that. It will go with the symbols about the idea that goes with nation, religion, selfhood, and that is what he will rather keep on exploiting in different ways also. So the tyrant, he knew human folly like the back of his hand, and he knows very well how to exploit it, and was greatly interested in armies and fleets, and fleets. They love to get dressed like the army people. They love to get dressed. You have seen the great dictator. Yeah? They love to get dressed like as if they are Jawans. And then they love to pass times on the borders also with Jawans. If there are festival time, then they would prefer to not to stay with family, but to stay with the Jawans, the armies. They have a great charm. They are very much greatly interested in armies and fleets. And then they use armies and fleets for their expansion of the land also, expansion of their ego also, which becomes the expansion of the land also. The Jawans keep on sacrificing their lives, but then the tyrant always keeps on using those lives for his personal gain and benefit, political gain and political benefits. It is always used. That is why he is very much interested in armies and fleets there. Okay? When he laughed, last two lines, they are very chilling lines. Last two lines have a very chilling effect. This, when he laughed, respectable is an ironical use of the word. Respectable senators, parliamentarians, or the followers, nowadays, the senators are not only sitting in parliament, but they are outside also. There are ratnas which are outside also, and they also keep on tweeting as the tyrants want it to be tweeted. They also, in support of the tyrants, they also keep on tweeting in a similar way. So when he laughed, respectable senators burst with laughter. When he laughed, respectable senator, when he makes several kinds of gimmicks in parliament. If you can see the gimmick that I am making, he keeps on several gimmicks in parliament, and then when he makes gimmicks, the parliamentarians laugh. They burst with laughter in the parliament when they speak. They make fun of other people, or when they speak, the other people also make. There is a kind of sycophancy being referred here. Sycophancy is referred. Sycophancy, chaplusi, chatukarita. So when he makes a very mild joke, then also there is a outburst of laughter. And this reference to this word, burst with laughter. Normally it is burst into laughter. The right word is normally burst into laughter. But here the poet is using the word burst with laughter. It means perhaps that this laughter is forceful. Forceful. It is not natural laughter. It is not natural. Yeah? It is not natural. It is forceful laughter that these people are making just to please the tyrant. Just perhaps to please the tyrant. This laughter is being made here. So when he laughed, respectable, ironical use of the word respectable, senators, the followers, the celebrities, burst with laughter. And when he cried, the little children died. The little children died in the streets. The little children died in the streets. Now, even this last line is very powerful line, and there are lots of references in last line, lots of allusions that comes there. The first allusion that comes is biblical. Biblical reference here is in the little children. In the little children. Let me share this small video clip here to see this context. I hope you are seeing the shared screen. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Suffer the little children to come unto me. This is what Jesus Christ told to the. Now, what is the context? This is a 2 minutes video clip from Life of Jesus Bible. So that the point becomes more clear. Yeah?
Master is in need of rest. Please, please. Peter, James. Suffer the little children.
So, his disciples, when they are stopping the other children to come to meet Jesus Christ, they say that, well, the master, the guru is tired, is taking rest, so don't come. And then he says, suffer the children. Well, we can say कि भाई बच्चों को थोड़ा सहन कर लो. बच्चों को ऐसा नहीं कहते कि मैं थक गया हूं. अब थक गए हो फिर भी बच्चों को सहन कर लो. Suffer the children to come unto me. So don't stop children from coming unto me. Suffer the बच्चों को थोड़ा सहन कर लो. In that context, he says this.
Come unto me. Forbid them not. for of such is the kingdom of God. Verily I say unto you, whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child shall in no wise enter therein.
Well, the point here we have to make is the compassion for children. We have seen earlier with reference to the great dictator also that many political leaders, Hinkle in that film also was shown with children. And we have seen when we were discussing that so many leaders worldwide also love to have photographs with children. So what they are trying to do, like as if they all are like Jesus Christ, they want to project themselves as if they are full of compassion, love. They are like son of gods. So that is what perhaps they are trying to do. If you see the Dhwani in that image, if you read the understatements of the images, then perhaps they are referring to this. Now, if you have not seen this image of Jesus Christ with children, then those images we don't understand. The children reference, we don't, but that is the compassion that he is trying to display. Here, in case of Jesus Christ, it is true love. It is not a show off that he is making, but his true compassionate, his true love is getting reflected here. So that is one reference that we see in the last line. So this is getting connected with all those images of the statesmen, the political leaders, Hinkels of the great dictator, or the Hitler of the day when the poem is created, where this reference that comes there. At the same time, with that, there is another reference also here, and that is here that when he cried, the little children died in the streets. There is a kind of an interchange of words from a very famous expression that is known to many people. For example, let me share this screen. Here, this John Lothrop Motley's work, The Rise of the Dutch Republic, which was published in 1859. And in this report, he is citing a report of 1584. In this work, he is citing a report of 1584 about the death of the Dutch ruler William the Silent, Dutch king of the Dutch. The ruler's name is William the Silent, and a very benevolent king, a very sympathetic ruler. William the Silent was his name. And in that report of 1584, which is cited by John Lothrop Motley, he says that as long as he lived, he was the guiding star of a whole brave nation. And when he died, refer this line, when he died, the little children cried in the streets. When he died, the little children little children cried in the streets. And what reference we see here? Here it is, when he cried, when Tyrant cried, little children died in the streets. See the play of the word. When William the Silent died, little children cried in the streets. When the tyrant cried, the little children died in the streets. And most of this crying is also crocodile's tears. Crocodile's tears. Many a time and again, after every 100 days or 2-3 years, they will cry once in a while. When that I am doing so many things for this, and yet the people are not understanding. So it will be easy to cry for this. But we can say when they are unhappy, when tyrants are unhappy, then what happens is that little children dies in the street. And what we remember here is a poem again by Meena Kandasamy, Massacre of the Innocents. Intertextuality is always something that you have to keep in your mind. Whatever literature we study, if you find any cross reference to that, don't forget to interweave it in your answers, assignments, presentations, or your thinking activity also. Don't only write for a particular text only. Keep on intervening one text with the another text. So another reference, Massacre of the Innocents, which we have studied. Very quick reading I would do here to connect with this. Little children died in the streets. Yeah? Indra, bad cop, Vedic boss, an inspirational hate monger, Indra, who went to work inside Diti's womb, afraid she would mother the demons. Indra, who butchered her fetus into 49 beats, so that as the legend goes, they were reborn as wailing winds. Herod merely chopped up male kids in Bethlehem. Hitler only gassed Jewish infants in Germany. And the peacekeepers just dipped Tamil babies in boiling tar in Elam. So this killing children of the other before they were even born. So this reference that comes here, the tyranny, the tyrant's character, and it is all stories of all tyrants is normally going in a similar way, that there will always be a history of children being killed, and to cleanse the bloody hand, which is there, like Lady Macbeth or Macbeth in the hands. You have to keep on taking photographs with children. You have to keep on taking photographs. Optics, the politics of optics, visuals. You have to create as if that will be the perfume of Arabia, as if that optic will be the perfume of the Arabia that can remove the bad smell of the blood from the hands of the tyrants. But obviously that never happens. Someday again, some poets will rise and then they will write epitaph on a tyrant, on the characteristics of a tyrant. Now, there is no direct reference to Hitler here, not a single word in Massacre of Innocents. There are very direct references. Herod is there, Indra is there, peacekeepers are there, Hitler is there, many references are there. But in this poem, there is no direct reference to anything. But the outside element, that is the external source, that 1939 when it was written, and he has lived in Berlin, he might be aware about the tyranny of Hitler, and so he wrote this poem. He would not refer because Hitler is very much alive, and the Nazis and all writers were afraid of Nazis, which also we discussed in our discussion, that how Virginia Woolf has mentioned in the diary that they used to keep the plan to commit suicide in case there is a knocking on the door and Nazis are waiting outside. Then better to die than to be captured and taken into concentration camps of the Nazis. So some poets will someday tell the story. These tyrants want to tell their own history. They want to sing their own songs. They want to see that, well, we are the first. We are the historical beings. We are Avatari Purush. We are the great human beings ever born on this earth. They want to tell all the stories. But literature will not pardon the tyranny of the people. Anybody that is doing that they are doing anything against humanity. Crimes against humanities can never go unpardoned. Can never go unpardoned. Poets will give their own punishments. Poets will narrate the history in a different way. That's why literary writers or literature is a different kind of a history. What the history cannot mention, the literature can mention, because history requires evidence of everything. Evidence. Now, poets do not require any evidence. Poets can sing the song with the help of metaphors, and they can tell the truths about the time in a more significant way. So that is epitaph on a tyrant, and it is not only Hitler. Herod is also there, and all kinds of tyrants that has ever come. They are there, and they are going to come. Even when we are also not there, the poetry will keep on reminding us that these are the characteristics of the tyrant. One has to be very careful. Otherwise, they are going to commit crime against humanities. And if you are a part of that, if you are with them, you are no less a criminal. You will be somewhere, even if you're not go there with like Macbeth and murder the King Duncan, but you are there as a planner. You are there as a supporter. You are a motivator. And so there is a blood on your hands also. That's why people say in this Corona times that we all are like Lady Macbeth. Because we are doing voting. It is we who do voting. We all are Lady Macbeth. We all have blood on our hands. We all have blood on our hands. If this is to be seen as the nature's revenge, then all humanity, all human beings have committed a crime against humanity by silently supporting tyranny. By silently supporting tyranny, everybody has committed a crime against humanity. But poets will not remain silent. Literature will speak. Literature has to speak. These kinds of things there. Literature is not meant for prashasti gan. They are not there for stuti gan or to write chalisas. It is not there for chalisa writing or a sycophantic literature there. So it's a very small but a very powerful poem. Very small poem, very simple poem, but it has interesting layers of meanings. Interesting layers of meanings are seen in this poem there. Anything you would like to add? Anybody would like to add anything into this? Any question? Any question? Then also we can take if you have any question. Or anything that you would like to add here? Anybody? Even if you put in the chat, then I will read the chat question also if there is anything there. Okay, if there are no questions, then we stop the recording of this session here. Okay.